Hey there, new year, new name. This is Izolda Trachtenberg for the Your Creative Mind podcast. Yes, I've changed the name because you know what? I want to talk about how creativity, your creativity, can change the world and your life. So you'll still be getting all of the groundbreaking interviews with artists, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who are changing the world with their creativity. And I'm going to be diving even deeper into what it means to bring creativity into your life and into your work and into your friendships and into your world. Because I think, and you know this, I've talked about it, creativity, the creative mindset, your ability to build awareness and mindfulness and create the life you want is what's going to change the world. So while you're going to be hearing the Creative Solutions podcast for the next few episodes, please know this podcast is now the Your Creative Mind show. I hope that you stick around. I hope that you'll be here to learn and grow with me as I keep exploring the depths and heights of your creative mind. And now, let's get on with the show.
If you're not funny and you don't want to be funny, great, but realize that there's real value in letting people have a place to play and to do that in a way that actually is really important for bonding, for creativity, for cohesivity. All of those things play together.
Hi, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Izolda Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll hear interviews with innovative creative artists, entrepreneurs, business executives, and thought leaders. You'll have a front row seat as they explore their internal motivations that inspire them to grow, achieve, and innovate. Get their insights and realizations as I tease out answers to questions they've never even pondered before. This episode is brought to you by my upcoming book, Get Booked, a performer's guide to working with booking agents in the gig economy. Are you ready to thrive in gigs, big or small? Start with my Nailing Your Holiday Gigs checklist, your ultimate guide to crushing the holiday season. Grab it in the show notes and mark your calendar. The book drops January 2025. Get ready to go pro, book smarter, and own the gig economy. And now, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Creative Solutions Podcast. I'm your host, Izolda Trachtenberg. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time to listen. And I, of course, am still in my throes of getting over this allergic attack. Darn it. So if you hear me coughing, that's why. You know I don't edit. I just want to be as honest with you as possible and as transparent as possible. But I do want to introduce you to this week's guest. I am thrilled to welcome Anthony Poponi to the show. I want you to get ready for a really great conversation with Anthony. Anthony is the CEO and founder of Focus on the 40, and we're going to find out what that is in a bit. Anthony is a positive psychology guru who helps people find more joy and more fulfillment at work. Through dynamic keynotes, retreats, and team building events, he offers practical tools and strategies for boosting workplace happiness and success. Anthony's latest book, The Little Book of Workplace Happiness, right? Great title, is packed with powerful tips for transforming your work environment. And I'm very excited to welcome Anthony to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Izolda.
I am amazed and thrilled and delighted with the work that you're doing because you and I work along similar paths. You're working on the idea of happiness. I'm working on the idea of creativity and innovation. And to me, creativity and innovation lead to happiness if you feel like your contributions are valued. So I'm very excited to talk with you. But I'm just going to dive right in and ask you, what led you to start Focus on the 40, and how did you sort of delve and dive into the world of positive psychology?
Yeah, that's I will tell you, positive psychology has been life-changing for me, finding that discipline and understanding it, applying it with groups, but also applying it for myself. And so, understanding that I am also a human being. Yeah, I think where did this incept from is interesting, and it's been a journey, and I think that evolution of that journey is it's an important evolution of paying attention to what the opportunities were in front of me and exploring how I can be of service and how I want to be of service and trying to align those as much as possible. And so I pay attention to those things, and I've tried to craft a company that is built around the things that have incredible value and impact and service to other people, but also are not giant pain points for me. It's not me doing things that I don't like doing. Um, so to answer the question maybe more directly, is it came from an understanding of like my business is half professional speaking, so conferences, trade shows, associations, right? And the people at those places are people that go back to workplaces, and in general most people are struggling with something at work, and a very few people have found the perfect culture, the perfect place. And if you're one of those people, excuse me, then you found that perfect place, stay there, because it's rare, and for the rest of those groups, I'm just trying to help them. And in a lot of ways, I'm just trying to help them get to cultures that are generally pretty good, and helping them move towards, great, being exceptional, being really high performing, cohesive teams. And certainly creativity is woven into that.
I love that you said cohesive teams. That's something that's
Mm,
so important in my work as well.
yeah.
How do we get a team to coalesce so that everyone on the team feels uh, like their opinions are valid, like they're being valued, like they are able to make contributions? But one of the things that I'm noticing is as I'm doing the research on you and on the work you're doing, one of the things that I see you talk about is happiness and trust and humor. And
Um,
I would love to talk with you about how those three, particularly that you've decided to focus on, fuel creativity or productivity in a team setting. And do you have any real world examples that you can share with how those things, those topics, have informed the work that you're doing?
oh yeah, for sure. I think one of the big reframes that's been valuable for me with happiness is detaching happiness from these feelings of elation and joy, right? Like that is not happiness in its own right. So if I'm working with a group on workplace happiness, it doesn't mean that they're just running around telling jokes and doing cartwheels all the time, right? Redefine that and take the word happiness and change it to the word contentment,
Mm.
change it to the word fulfillment, having a mixture of purpose in the work that you're doing, pride in the work that you're doing, and also pleasure, in the work that you're doing, having whatever those things mean. And there's so many facets to all of that. Um, and so getting people to kind of like breaking that word happiness down, tearing it apart and putting it back together. And then exploring that through the lens of course, life as a whole, because if you're happy away from work, you bring that to work with you. And if you're happy at work, you take that home with you. And the inverse is true as well. Like if you're struggling with something away from work or you're struggling at work, then you carry that with you. Like we are human beings and not robots, at least not yet. And so that's a big part of it, and helping people understand that within this whole process of crafting a fulfilling life. And I use the word crafting because I believe that happiness and this pursuit of happiness is pursuit, right? It's a verb, right? um, but there's a crafting piece to it where through the work that you do, through intentional activity, that's the control that you have, that's the efficacy, the agency you have over crafting a life that has all these many components that are fulfilling for you. And so I get people to understand that doesn't mean that we're all getting along perfectly all the time, right? And that conflict is necessary for growth. That conflict is necessary for cohesion. Um, to really get people to like talk things through in a way that's direct and authentic, and not having conversations in the parking lot instead of having them in a team setting. So that's a big part of that happiness piece. And then trust is human beings are wired, like deeply wired, to crave trust. We want that feeling of trust. The feeling of trust feels really good. The absence of trust is where we hold back, and if we were to talk about creativity, if you don't trust the people around you that they have good intentions, and that when you show vulnerability or that you try something new and that you're going to make a mistake, um, that shuts off that flow of creativity, right? Because you get protective, you get defensive, you're worried about the implications, versus saying they know me, they like me, they trust me, and they're also putting me in a position to try new things. And inherent in that is the likelihood that I'm going to make mistakes, and that's okay. That's a process of growth, and that is woven into human happiness. And then humor itself is just a great tool for bonding, and it has to be done well, has to be done thoughtfully. Not everybody is funny. Some people think they are, and they're not. And if you can understand kind of like what your style is around humor, and if you're not funny and you don't want to be funny, great, but like realize that there's real value in letting people have place to play and to do that in a way that actually is really important for bonding, for creativity, for cohesivity. All of those things play together, and you don't have to be the stand-up comedian in the group. But you can be part of the audience, allowing for those sorts of behaviors to take place because you see the value in them.
I love that you said that. And I should tell you, I have embraced the pause. In other
Hmm.
words, if somebody says something and I'm like, I need to think about this for a second,
Yeah, cool.
I will just sort of sit quietly and think about it for a minute because you said so much here. And there's something to me about this notion of happiness and of having not just having agency, but taking agency over your own state of emotions. That I think there's something very powerful there. Like, for example, one of the things that I talk to my clients about is yeah, they're not always going to love everything they're doing.
Hmm.
You might just not. But can you find something you love about something you're doing? And there's something very powerful to me about that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that because one of the things that I'm hearing you talk about or maybe talk around is confidence, right? When we are in a situation where we're working as part of a team and we want to contribute, we want to feel valued, we have to have confidence both in ourselves and also in others in order to do the best we can because, like you said, if you're vulnerable, you might not get to that place where you feel okay bringing things up or talking about them in a way that isn't, whispering around the water cooler. So I would love it if you would talk a little bit about that part of it, that piece of how do you encourage the different people in any group that you're working with to build their confidence and to exhibit their confidence enough to be the ones who speak up or to speak first.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'm leaning into the pause myself. I think confidence is multi encourage it in other people, right? For sure, right? And you have to be willing to put aside your own interests, right? You have to have the best intentions for the organization, and sometimes the best intentions for the organization come at a cost to you, right? And that can mean you don't get promoted, you don't get the budget you need, whatever that thing is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's It's a huge component of trust. But even that confidence piece comes like getting people to lean into the discomfort that is inherent in growth is important. And I think that vulnerable leaders can do that. Like if they can share their story about the mistakes they've made, about the things they've tried, about their own journey and their own path and their own setbacks, I think it's incredibly powerful. You know that we have this false expectation, either as leaders as how we have to behave, or how others perceive people at the top, called a CEO, C-suite, whatever it would be, that they don't make mistakes, that they haven't made mistakes, right, and that they have all the answers. And I think that just does not give people the grace and the space to kind of play in playing into and learning and growing and evolving, right? And for me, it's this breakdown of like, do leaders know, they just know all the best answers, they just inherit, maybe they're just really good at finding the best answer, and that comes from a degree of humility about, I'm really good at what I do, I'm a solid leader of other human beings, um, and I know what I know and I know what I don't know, and what I don't know I know how to surround myself with so that I can go tap into it when I need it, right? And even that, it's got some really, humility is the word I'd come back to there.
It's so interesting to me that you said, I know what I know and I know what I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
because that takes an inordinate amount of self awareness on the part of the leader. But they're still leading people. They're still responsible. Now, there's creative leaders, there's servant leaders, there's blah, blah, blah. There's lots of different kinds of leaders. But I'm focusing a little bit more on the workplace itself. And to me, the workplace culture is what's important, right? The leader can be whatever kind of leader they are, but if they're not leading their people well, if the culture isn't one that fosters some of this kind of behavior and thinking and feeling, then they're not going to get very far. So I guess what I'm wondering from you is what do you think makes a workplace culture truly exceptional? And how can leaders nurture that kind of environment, regardless of the kind of leader they are?
Yeah, that you're mirroring back some things I said in a nice way. First of all, you use the word foster, and fostering requires activity, right? It's not a passive culture is not a passive thing. Culture is not a static thing. It's dynamic, right? It's dynamic
Hmm.
based on external factors influencing what's happening, to the business itself, disruptors or changes or setbacks or opportunities, right? And then there's the internal piece of like what's even thinking about culture, like the sorry, I've got my own cough going today. But what are you doing internally to actively internally to foster a culture where people thrive?
Hmm.
And it can be so subtle, and it's also incredibly multifaceted, and that's what makes it, I think, so hard is that there's who are you as a leader, what are you comfortable doing, what are you not comfortable doing, what are you holding back from, how is that impacting the organization, what are you really good at, what do you do really well, great, all those things are important. That honoring of what you don't do well, including aspects of culture, if it's relationship building piece, whatever that might be, right? um and I think with kind of with any group too is like you have to understand where you are before you can understand, and before you can understand where you, as you try to explore where you want to go, right? So understanding what it looks like to be a culture that has a lot of trust, that has really good support, that has really good relationships within there, that encourages people to challenge themselves, encourages people to make mistakes, or understanding all of those pieces as kind of like a baseline condition, as a foundation to work from, and then saying, okay, now what do we need to do to get where we want to go? And I think it just requires a lot of exploration. And what you said earlier was really interesting, about like, do you know who you are? Like, do you know what you're good at? Do you know what you're bad at? Do you know what you're weak at? Do you know what you're strong at? Do you know what your blind spots are? Can you flex into those things? Do you know what the organization has as strengths and weaknesses, tendencies, patterns, whatever those things might be? And then what do you do with that? And I think that's where that we come back to the word fostering, come back to the word action around that.
Hmm. I'm fascinated by you. You and I are like two sides of the same coin. It's so, but it is interesting to me that again, it's an act, the leader has to play an active role because they're the
Yeah.
leader, of course. Like when we think about it that way, we go, yeah, for sure. I know that and I understand it, but the nuts and bolts of that become a little bit more challenging. So I guess that is my next question for
Mm-hmm.
you is what are the practical steps leaders can take to ensure their people feel aligned with their work and have a strong sense of purpose and belonging
Mm-hmm.
as they're going through perhaps growing pains or whatever's going on in the
Mm-hmm.
company that they feel like they need to address the culture of the company or the organization.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that leaders can do to help their people get aligned?
Yeah, that's. I feel like I'm going back to what I said before, but I think there a degree of structured introspection is really
Mm,
valuable. And I chose those words. I guess I chose them intentionally. I think it's not language I would use all the time, but what do you know about what's going on, and are you sure that you know about what's going on internally? Right, that we can have perceptions about how things are going, and that's why I think trust is so foundational, right? And anytime I'm working with a group, that's usually the first thing that we play with is like there's three different facets I play with a group of people, but one of those is really like what is everyone saying about this, right?
mm,
Getting everyone to kind of like look internally at a department or a unit or a division, whatever that would be, or if it's if a smaller business, you can do the whole group. But what are the patterns that you're seeing in there within the group, and then talking about it. And when I say talking about it, it implies the word fluency, and giving people the opportunity to say, well, what's our workplace culture like? Well, what's the language around that? What are the facets of that we can actually use as individuals to explore what's been going well and maybe what's not been going well. And of course, the stuff that's going well, you don't want to ignore that. I mean, you want to continue to like pump that and feed that, right? And say, good, we do these things well. These are things that have to stay. And then what are the things that we're working on that are our own internal growth opportunities? And so I think that word fluency comes back to me of a lot of giving people the language to talk about the things that are happening around them. What does trust mean? What does trust mean within a group of people? What do I contribute to trust individually? Like, what does that mean? How do we break that down so that I can see and watch my own behaviors, and think about why I have relationships that are full of trust and relationships that where trust is absent, and then what do we do to build that up on the individual level within two different silos, all those sorts of things. So it's the complexity is what human beings on their own are incredibly complex. And of course, it's like a logarithmic scale when you start putting more than one human next to each other and asking them to achieve a common thing. And that complexity is why I didn't have like a one word answer for you, on this, because I think it's really unique to each organization and where they are and where they want to go.
Yeah, and there is a temptation to become very simplistic in our viewpoint here. And I want to I want to dive a little bit deeper on that and kind of
Sure.
go, okay, if we're not going to be simplistic, if we're going to foster trust, if we're going to foster all of this, you're going to find that some people in your organization are more ready to accept and get inspired by these changes, these things that you as the leader want to enact. And some will have a lot of resistance.
Mhm.
And some might be somewhere in the middle. And I guess the thing I'm always interested in this because there's always that one person. I'm talking to a group of 80 people, and there's always that one person I see towards the back that has to be there, that rolls their eyes right when I'm starting and looking at their watch. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
So in those moments, yes, I have things in my toolbox that I'm gonna bring out, and that person is gonna be engaged by the time 5 minutes have passed, blah, blah, blah. But the
Mhm.
point is there's always gonna be that resistance from some people. And especially since there are times when you're asking them to look at things they might not be ready to look at. So when you're in this space and you're working with an organization and you are working on transforming the company culture with the leadership and with the people who work in the organization, what do you do about resistance to that change, whether it's from leadership or from the people who make up the body of the company?
Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore that person, right? Especially if that person is in a position of influence,
Sure.
because they can undermine the whole process. And I think understanding why their resistance, where that comes from, and it can be a million reasons, right?
Mm.
Oh yeah, well, we've done these sort of team building things before and they didn't work. Well, why didn't are you sure they didn't work, and why didn't
Mm.
they not work before? What could be different this time? Fine, there people have tons of reasons for inertia and resistance, whatever that would be. um, I do think it has to be modeled strongly and authentically from the top down, that
Mm.
it
Mm-hmm.
can't just be hire the consultant, make the consultant do all the stuff. It has to be something that they're willing and engaged in doing, and modeling that, and then not allowing that resistance. And one of the things I'm constantly trying to work on with groups of people is getting them, to minimize the naysayers. That the naysayer is a misery loves company, right?
Mm.
the Why don't we say happiness loves company? Why don't we we don't have that inverse relationship with this commiserating, the word commiserate, calm with misery with other people, right? But we have calm panis, bread with people we break bread with, companion, right? People we break bread with, people we share food with, right? It's in the etymology of these words. But if you have these people that are just like, you have to minimize their impact on the group, right? And if you can bring them around, great. I think that takes a really deep introspective conversation with some of these people to really get at why and where they're coming from, what they're bringing into the situation, and what holds them back. And I don't know what your process is with the groups, but I do a lot of group work, and then I support that with individual coaching. And that's, I think, where a lot of those things can come. You can have those like breakthrough moments with these people about why are they holding back, why are they resistant, why are they undermining the process, why are they sabotaging the process, where's that coming from? Izolda, are you there? Can't hear you.
Oh, I somehow got myself on mute. That was so weird.
Hey, I thought
Here
you
I
were doing
am.
one of those
No, no, no.
pauses on me again. I was like, oh, okay.
I've been talking for the last 20 seconds. So let me go back
Geez,
and
I'm sorry.
restate what I said. No, 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 no. It
Yeah,
was entirely my fault. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so
it's that
here's
cough.
yeah, I started coughing. I turned it on mute and must have forgotten to unmute myself. Um, so okay, so here I am. I'm gonna
Yep,
restate what I said.
yep.
Something that you said that kind of made me go, huh. You were talking about misery loves company, and you said,
Mm-hmm,
why doesn't happiness love company?
mm-hmm,
And as I was thinking about that, it kind of pinged me and it made me go, well, when someone is miserable, you most definitely, generally speaking, aren't going to be jealous that they're miserable if you're yourself not happy. But if
mm,
someone is happy, someone who is not happy might be jealous or at
mm-hmm,
least envious of that
mm-hmm,
happiness. So,
mm-hmm,
really rooting for someone else who is happy or who is doing well, that's a big part of it. It makes me think of the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, actually, when Deborah Winger's character, whose name I can't remember, gets out of their small town, and her friends are all like, "Yeah, go you," and they're happy for her because they otherwise would all be living in this crappy town or whatever, however
mm-hmm,
they purported it to be.
mm-hmm,
So when I'm thinking about this, I'm kind of going, okay, what kind of communication has to happen for us to be able to transform that? And I'm not saying everybody who's unhappy is jealous of everybody who's happy. I'm not saying
mm-hmm,
that. But
mm-hmm.
to answer, to sort of ping on your question, I'm kind of going, okay, what do we need to do there to fix that, what could be toxicity? And one of the things that I noticed is that you are an aficionado of transformative communication. And I'm wondering, as part of this, as part of addressing things like this, is that a tool in the toolbox that you would use when you see this kind of interplay among the people you're working with?
Yeah, there was a lot there.
I know.
That's okay. I like it. Because I think what's hard about this scenario is that we're playing in the world of intangibles and not intangibles. Sorry, that's the wrong word. Ambiguity, or like we're talking about like why is this person resisting, right? And what would you do in that situation? So we're talking about, all right, well, what are the tools that we would play with there? And I'm trying to, yeah. So I'm saying, well, I don't know, but I need to know, right? And I need to figure that out. And it's a two-way street, right? Part of that is, what are the tools that I can be using to get why that person is being resistant to change, right? And fine, some people love change, most people do not, right? I think CEOs at the top see that change is required. You know, that's a static company is a company that's withering. And then there are other people that are very process oriented that don't want to see change occur because they have mastered, they've become competent in the process that's in front of them. And when you take competence away from them, you're impacting their status. And status is the word that bubbled up for me when you were sharing this story about, officer and a gentleman. And it's, how do we get, in some situations it could be that this resistance for them is because you're taking away some of their competence, right?
Mm.
Or by celebrating other people, you're stealing their thunder, and I can see where that would be really painful for some people if we can't see that other people's successes within an organization are summative, that they are 1 + 1 = 3. And sometimes the light shines on you and sometimes the light shines on other people, and when the light is shining on other people, it's not taking away from you, you know um and so I think it would be really, in every situation, I think it's exploratory, right? And some people, some of that exploration is done through tools, techniques, getting people um to unwind, to break apart these pieces, and getting them to share it. And that's a whole another piece, right? That's where trust is so important, of like getting people to say, I'm uncomfortable with this because, right, whatever that thing is.
Hmm.
And some of that is introspection that they need to be doing. You can create an environment, this cultural piece, where people can do those things and say those things, or you find other ways to get people at that. And do they have their own fluency of understanding why they're blocking something, why they're sabotaging something, why they're not contributing to something, why they're withholding, whatever that is. And it's I think it's a very interpersonal thing. And when we were talking before about culture, there's, I think there's best practices on doing all these things. We know what it kind of looks like to create a high trust culture, and what some of those, when we have a high trust culture, what's present in those cultures. And then there's this whole other part of just getting to know your people, getting to know the dynamic of what's happening with that person. And you can't do that if you are the CEO managing 100 people directly, right? That's why we have hierarchies and structures with smaller teams, because each of these complex human beings requires a unique touch, unique touches, unique management styles, whatever those things would be. um I hope in general, though, that people just don't ignore it. I think that this one of the, you have that naysayer, and that naysayer can undermine a lot of things. And I call them, and especially when those naysayers are somebody of influence, uh somebody with a track record of success, somebody that's really valuable to relationships internally and externally, with other partners, or other, whoever it might be, clients. um I call them a PITA. I call them a pain in the asset. Like they're such a great asset to the company, but they do these other things that are really detrimental. And you can't ignore those things. You have to sort those out.
Yeah. And unfortunately, if there's someone who's integral to the company or someone who's high up in the
Mm,
company,
yeah.
they often hold a lot more sway
Mm,
than they perhaps should. But that's the problem. I always talk about myself as I'm a special guest star. I'm not a regular cast member. When I come
mm,
into a company, I'm not going to be there for the next 6 months unless they want to
mm,
book me for a consulting gig for that long.
yep.
Generally speaking, we're not there for that long.
Yep.
I feel a little bit like I'm the crazy wild aunt who riles them up and hands them back, and that's what I do with my niece and nephews for sure.
That's me as an uncle too.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because it's very different when you are a regular cast member and you're there day to day.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking about this, when we're talking about relative levels of happiness, and I almost want to say, every time I say happiness, I want you to think contentment, because happiness to me feels very uh fly by night. It's like a will o' the wisp.
Ephemeral.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
is, because
Yep.
it tends to ping up high and then it drops, whereas
Hmm.
contentment feels to be more consistent or more constant if you can get to that place. But one of the things that I'm hearing you talk about is, and this is so much of it, is communication. And I would love to get your thoughts on what we need to do to improve communication throughout these organizations, because so seldom do the people at the top really truly know what the people who are boots on the ground are doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's something that I know everybody who works on organizational culture has to deal with. How do we extend the communication so that people are going to be able to communicate across department in the silos, as you put it, all of that in a way that will fundamentally allow the culture to grow into one that not only is cohesive, but is also, and this of course is always very important to me, creative and innovative.
Yeah, and you don't answer very you haven't given me a yes or no question yet, so thank you.
I don't. I never ask
No,
yes or no questions.
no.
It's true.
Yeah, human communication, I keep using the word complex. I'm just going to stick with it and keep going. It's complex, right? And but you talked about it from a standpoint of like interpersonal, right? Between two people or two groups of people, fine. And then overall, like what's the communication structure? Like how do we get everyone to understand where we're going, right? That's the value of strategic planning. That's the value of road mapping. That's the value of having playbooks about like, here's where we are going, having documents that are created to answer those questions, and then disseminating those documents thoughtfully, purposefully, immediately, regularly, right? And I say regularly, and I mean to the point of getting people to refusal. Like, here's where we're going. Here's why we're doing it. Here's what we remain focused on. And here's what your role is in helping us achieve that. Or here's what your role is in helping others make sure that they can achieve that, right? That's cohesivity, right? That's about people all rowing in the same direction. Um, I think those are really important things. Now, of course, what you have to have is like you can't have a mission, vision, value statement, and then a strategic plan that's 20, it can't be 27 pages long, but it needs to be uh, uh, people need to be able to understand how they fit in with that. Short, consistent, and congruent. And what I mean by congruent is what we say on paper, what we've decided to do, how we've agreed to behave as a group of people, is consistently how we behave day to day through our actions, our words, right? Um, I think that that's really important, making sure everybody knows where you're going. Because if you don't have that and you've created a vacuum and people don't know, they can fill that vacuum, and you don't want them to fill that vacuum with the wrong information, right? And I also think that that's why trust is really important. Is that if you have a vacuum, and a vacuum is sort of neutral. I'm not going to try to get into the physics of a vacuum right now, but I don't mean the thing that you sweep floors with. But like the absence, right? If there's nothing there, people can fill that with positive things or negative things. If you have a good trusting relationship at work, you may not know what's going on above you, but you trust the good intentions of the people to be doing good things that are important and that sometimes are hard, and hard for you to take. Like these changes are hard on me and my team, but I expect that what the decisions being made above me are made with the best intentions for the organization, even if it's challenging for me. So that's kind of like the global view of what that communication looks like, and why I come back to the word refusal, to the point where people say, you say, here's where we're going, here's why we're doing it, here's how we're going to get where we're trying to go, to the point where you say it so much that people are like, okay, I get it, I get it, I get it. Like they're like, okay, I get it. Okay, good. All right, good. I wanted to know that you got it, right? And then the complexity again of like this interpersonal communication between two people or within groups of people. We've let these devices, I'm looking over at my phone, right, that sends text messages so efficiently and sends emails fairly efficiently. um, Human beings aren't wired for that, right? If we looked at the breakdown of uh, if we look at the breakdown of what communication is overall between people, there's tonality, right? How we say the words we say. And then there's the nonverbal, the physical pieces of like what's our posture look like, what's our eye contact look like, um, how do those inform the words? Now, if you were to guess, Izolda, if I were to tell you that all three of those, tonality, physicality, and the words, if I were to tell you that's 100% of the communication we have with some person, what percentage would you put on the words?
Ah, Dr. Morabian, yes. Yeah. So for sure, body language is so important. And it's, 7:38:55. Longtime listeners, if you're a longtime listener of the show, I talk about this a lot.
Good.
But what's interesting to me about that 55% is while we were on lockdown
Mm,
and we did not have full body language access, we just had, head and shoulders,
yep.
communication became a different kettle of corn in some
Mm,
ways. And
mm,
so, yes, I agree with you. We have this need. We're pack animals. We love to do
yep.
things socially. I
Yep.
love Yuval Noah Harari's book Sapiens
Yep.
in part because he talks so
Yeah.
much about that.
Yep.
But what's interesting is, it's like watching murmuration when you're watching all the little birds fly in big groups all at once, and you're seeing these beautiful patterns because they're all
Mm,
communicating with one another, and they're all going to go in a certain direction, and we get to see it. That's one thing. On some level, I think humans, uh, we may take information in that way through body language, mostly 50, the 55% of the 738-55,
mhm,
but I don't know that we know that consciously. In other words, I feel like subconsciously you get those pangs in your belly when something feels unsafe or when something feels
mhm,
good or whatever, but
mhm,
we may no longer have the ability to consciously know when things are we sense it, but we don't necessarily have the ability to articulate it consciously. So the question that I have for you
mhm.
is what do we do then?
Yeah, and I think that you're grabbing onto the I like the word articulation, right? And consciously and subconsciously. Like I like that language because that's kind of what that's the point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That through the work that we do with people, we can bring the subconscious reactions that they make or subconscious judgments they make, the any of those things, we make it something that they can do consciously, right? That's why I use the word fluency about that.
Mm-hmm.
We get people to understand, okay, well, there's all right, cool. There's this, 7 to 10% of the words are the words are only 7 to 10% of the overall communication. I should be really cautious about communicating certain things of certain significance via a text or via an email and recognize when there's value. And even while Zoom is a flawed platform for this, per se, at least we get some of the other feedback,
Mm-hmm.
not just the words themselves. And I think that even these, the challenge with a lot of these workplaces is navigating this whole like, are we virtual now? We're hybrid now. We have some people coming and going, some people working at home, some people we never see in the office because they live a country away, um, or states away, whatever that thing would be. And then how do we make sure that we spend some time getting behind the the message behind the words that we see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Zoom is really great because we can jump on, we can have a quick conversation, but that is really different from getting a group of people to gather in a room. And for some organizations, that's just not possible, right? They're not going to like go through the process of bringing 50 people from around the globe into a room to talk for 2 hours and then send them home, right? So that we try to do that via Zoom. Um, there's efficiency and value in those things, but there's also this human dynamic behind all of that. And I think we have to pay attention to that and put structures in place and intention in place to honor the human side of things, that can get lost in the shuffle, and that relationship building. If you look at some of the facets of high trust cultures, that relationship building piece is really an important one because then we have a foundation to work from with the person across from us or the people across from us, because we put some time in and to building those. And for the longest time, I was like, team building feels like what was the word that you used before, when we're talking about happiness? That team building feels, I use the word
Ephemeral.
ephemeral. Yeah, and that wasn't your word,
No.
but team building. Oh, we're getting together for a team building. Okay, well, what's the point behind that team building? Well, the point behind that team building is to get the people across from each other to get to know each other in a way that they can understand more of the message and the words they use and their tonality. I mean, even tonality and behavior, are all really, they're pieces of the puzzle, but they're also, people can behave in really different ways and mean very different things based on the same behaviors. Like, are the arms across my chest? Am I is my arms perched across my chest and my eyes squinted? Does that mean I'm angry, or does that mean I'm deep thinking? And that's just so unique to the people around us. And we have to have this kind of catalog of understanding who those people are, to be able to interpret those things, or to not interpret those things, and to say, hey, what's going on over there? I'm seeing you do this, what, and I'm looking at my arms crossed and my eyes squinted down. And I'm going to inquire about that, because I want to make sure that I know what's going on here. And I want to know that I'm hearing from you if I need to hear from you, and what's actually bouncing around inside your head, and that pause, the pregnant pause, right, that you used before, gives you the opportunity to be reflecting. And then, what are you telling me? Like, what are you going to give me from that reflection? And if you're not giving me anything, we could have a problem.
But it's interesting because one of the things that I work with a lot of international companies,
Yeah.
and one of the things is that comes up often is what is going to work with one sort of national culture, if you will, like eye
Oh yeah.
contact, won't
Yeah.
work with others. So there's
Yep.
always
Yep.
there's always this notion of let's see where we are, let's see who my audience is,
Mm,
and then let's build from there. And sometimes you're just going to have to think on the fly. And
mm.
so one of the things that you said that was interesting to me was this notion. You said it early on, and it's part of this is when you're bringing people from different cultures, whether it's national cultures or regional cultures or local cultures. I worked in a company once where they were pretty evenly split between the two high school football teams. So I couldn't go like go Rangers without going, go Hawks,
Yeah.
because that would just not have been good. So there is this notion of figuring out what are those potential conflicts, but also using them. And I love that you work within generative conflict. And I would love it if you would talk a little bit, because we sort of touched on it a little, but we went on to another direction. But since I work in creativity and innovation so much, I would love to get your thoughts on how we can apply the concepts of generative conflict to these company and organizational culture issues, but also how we can use them to enhance creativity, constructive change, and collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah. It, if trust is the foundation for everything, right? You have to have that ability, and you have to nurture that within a group of people. Then on top of that, you can allow for conflict and you can encourage conflict. Um, because that you talked about, this whispering around the water coolers, that's actually it's actually undermining, the process of everyone. Those whispers need to be spoken words in the right situation at the right time. Now,
Mhm.
fine, people need to commiserate here and there. Fine, let them go share their struggles. But if things are being left unsaid because you are fearful of conflict, and everyone has a different relationship level with conflict, that can be cultural, it can be from your lived experience, it can be, and I mean cultural, like within the cultures around the world, right? And then it can be cultural within the organization, like, oh no, we just always agree with the leader and then we move on, right? um, and then your own experiences with conflict, like your comfort level with conflict, how you engage with those things, and growing that, like I said, team building felt ephemeral before. um, Getting people to like learn these soft skills, right? And soft skills, as like, well, there's hard technical skills and there's soft skills. Soft skills are going to be incredibly important going forward. They've been incredibly
Mhm.
important the entire time. They're going to keep being important. And so building up this ability, building muscles around different skill sets that allow us to say what needs to be said, and that's even part of the human happiness model of like that. This growth and change are kind of either growth and change are really important to this sense of fulfillment, because we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. We become sort of like, there could be apathy, there can be boredom attached to those things. um, but more specifically to conflict, we have to all understand what good conflict looks like, right? And what
Mm.
destructive conflict looks like. That's, there's some boundaries around that, obviously. um, but we have to learn to lean into that conflict as critical to being able to get everyone to talk things through, to really talk them through and share what's going on in our minds. And being heard and valued and respected for sharing your opinion also does not mean that we agree with you and we are going to do what you're saying, right? And we have to be okay with sharing our opinion. And I lean into this pretty easily about I speak my mind, I will share ideas, I can bring forward that creative side of me, and then I have to be okay with being wrong sometimes, right? And I don't want that to hold me back or hold people back from bringing forth these ideas and sharing what's on their mind. They just have to realize that sometimes they're incorrect, and that's okay, you know. But if we talk about these things and we have discourse around these things, and we can have productive conflict, generative conflict around these things, then we get everyone on the same page. We've talked through something, we've beat up an idea, we've torn it apart, we've put it back together, and now it's better than it was before because we welcomed in this critique and this criticism and this discourse around it. Now everyone's on the same page. Now we can make commitments, and then we can move forward and be rowing forward together as one. If you don't have that, if you don't have that level of um, consensus around something because you haven't talked something through about it, then you can't message that in the organization, especially down if you're in a leadership role, getting people to say, no, this is why we're doing this. And I know it's going to be hard for our team, but I know this is what's good for the organization. And that's where you get everybody just kind of rowing in the same direction, you know, as one.
And mic drop. I love it. I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that to me, what's interesting, Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, in it, he talks about the various levels of yes, the yes of, okay, I
Yep.
just want you to shut up, all the way through to, oh, yes, your mission has become my own, and we're going to
Yep.
walk forward together. And that's
Yep.
really very much what I heard you say there, which I just love because I love that book and I love Chris Voss. What's interesting to me about this is that as we work through this, we constantly have to look at the check-in. And I love the check-in. I love knowing where I am, and I love seeing the delta. I love seeing where I've been and where
Mm.
I am now.
Mm.
So when you're working with people, with companies and organizations, when you're doing this generative conflict, which I just love that term, I think it's great.
Yeah.
What are the benchmarks for you? You as the person who's doing this work.
Well, it's I'm writing down Chris Voss, by the way. I love what you had to say about that. Yeah, it's as with anything, it's not static, it's dynamic, right? So where are we now, and then what can we look back on, and then how do we have a way to compare where we are now to where we were, both good and the bad, you know. So I use all sorts of different instruments, and I'm sure you do too, as far as like, you know, assessing culture. What's culture look like? All right, let's, you know, here's an assessment tool that gives us an idea of what this looks like. All right, here's what this department is doing really well. Here's the facets that are really great within this. The leadership is providing this in this in this department, division, this cluster of people, whatever it would be, or the organization as a whole. And then where are we? Oh, 6 months later, a year later, you know, and
Mhm.
then looking back on those things, because you know the dynamic nature of this is it has like you know, four dimensions. I don't know, a multiverse of dimensions, because there's people that come, people that go, external changes, internal changes, leaders move around, people move around within organizations, somebody retires. All of those things create a dynamic nature of things. And then, of course, you're making ideally, you know, these investments internally on your team to say, okay, here's what we know from a year ago. What are we doing about it? And what kind of impact are we having from that? You know, and so are you looking at evidence-based practices? Are you doing things that you can actually, is there trackability to what's going on internally?
Mhm.
And so, you know, that's part of that fluency too. You know, that survey instrument like that I use with teams is meant to give them the ability to say, and you said it before. You're like, I have this palpable feeling, right? How do why what's that feeling? What is that feeling? What
Mhm.
I feel really good about the people around me. Well, why? Right? I don't feel good about working with these people. Well, why? Right? And give people the ability to unpack that and to break that apart into things and pieces and languages, and behaviors, so that they can understand what that looks like. Being like, oh, that's what a breach of trust looks like and feels like. And I know that because now I know what these components of trust look like, right? That's an example I would use.
I love that. Ah, that's great. Anthony, I I hope you understand that I could keep you here for like another 6 hours. Truthfully, I have so many more questions, and hopefully at some point you will come back. But
Yeah, I'd love to.
uh,
Love to.
this is. I mean, you and I are both like, "Ooh, let's get into this. This is so cool." I would love it if somebody is saying, "Hey, I want to know more about Anthony Poponi. I want to know more about the work he's doing. I want to find him. Where should someone go if they're interested in working with you or learning more about how you do what you do?"
Yeah, I would point you towards two places because I'm a raging narcissist apparently. My website is anthonypoponi.com. Um, and also from the business side of things is focus on the 40. That's focusonthe40.com. We'll get you there as well. And all sorts of fun, cool free resources to try on there for people to start this exploration on their own. So I hope people walk away with something like, oh, like, and I would say that this is even the process of growth. And I'm sorry, this is more than what you asked me to say, but you know, pay attention to that thing that you're curious about. You don't have to always work on the hardest thing first, but there's stuff out there that you can be like, oh, I'm curious about what this could look like for myself or my team, and run down that path.
I love that you said that because focus on curiosity is one of the
Mm,
biggest things because that can lead to so much
mm,
as far as answers and also generating more questions, but those
mm-hmm.
questions are going to get you down to a path that ultimately gives you some answers that probably will surprise you. So I'm very excited that you said that, and I appreciate you
Good.
taking the time to be here. Thank you so much. I have just two more questions,
Okay.
and they are questions that I ask everybody who comes on the show, and they're silly questions, but I find that they
I
can
like
yield some
silly.
pretty profound. Yeah, good. Well, you like humor, so there you go. So the first question is, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And I don't mean your alarm.
uh, that's such a good question. Um, I, I think it's a desire to serve, for sure.
Mm.
And so I appreciate the impact I get to have on other people, and that can come in macro moments, of like working with a group of people. Fine, it can come in the micro moments of paying attention to the humans around me, people I know and people I don't know about, just making this walk through life, a little bit easier for everybody, and I think that's deeply wired into me.
I love that. I want to have something that wonderful to say. Usually it's my cats jumping on my head, but no, I mean it is. I appreciate you saying that very much. I think it's important for us to remember. And in this way, you are practicing what you preach, right? There's something very powerful about being someone who can stand up and say, I live this life because I believe in the work that I'm doing, and
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. So I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate that. And
Oh,
here
thanks.
is my pleasure. Here's the last question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And as I said, it's a silly question, but I find it can yield some profound answers.
Oh boy, oh boy.
And the question is this. If you had an airplane, environmentally
Mm-hmm.
friendly, of course,
Mm-hmm.
that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Mm. I I would say smile more.
All right. That I love how consistent you are.
Yeah,
That
it's
was awesome.
this whole thing, about life is, I think so much of it is the perspective we take, that I think with all this stuff that I've explored with human happiness is it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that life is easy. It's just how you're going to react to those things that are happening around you, and smiling through it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep.
I like to say that the difference between reacting and responding is how many
Mm.
breaths you take between what happens and what you do about it. That's my that's my little nugget that I tell everybody I work with because we're tempted to just react. And I'm
Uh-huh.
always like, take a few breaths.
Uh-huh.
Let's see about what the response might be. And that's different.
Hmm.
It's often different. If you take even a couple of breaths, it will take it will make things very different. So once again,
Love that.
Anthony, I am super grateful that you took the time to be here. I hope you'll come back and answer the 18 other questions that I had on my list to ask you. Uh, because as I said, we're two sides of the same coin, and this is,
Yeah.
I think we're both geeks for this, so it's really lovely
Yep.
to talk to you about it. Uh, Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
It was entirely my pleasure, I have to say. Alrighty, you know what to do if you want to find out more about Anthony Poponi and the work that he's doing. You can find him on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, the websites. All of that stuff will be in the show notes as well. You know that if you're listening to this, because I know people learn differently. Some need to see it, some need to hear it. You're going to be able to find it there. You're also going to be able to find out information about Anthony's upcoming book, which is the Little Book of Workplace Happiness. It's going to be cool. You're going to have to get it. I'm going to have to get it. And until next time, this is Izolda Trachtenberg for the Creative Solutions Podcast, reminding you, as always, to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the show if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Izolda Trachtenberg and is copyright 2024. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope.